and I teach about 80 of them, but it's a lot of fun, especially my New Testament class. They're seniors, so they like to ask a lot of questions. So they like to ask all kinds of questions about priests, about Jesuits, about.
Yes.
They ask me like everything. They ask me about aliens, Father. What if there are aliens? What's the church gonna do? So it's just. But I love those kind of
I
questions.
think that's great. I think that's so great.
Yeah.
So I did get a lot of questions for you, but I won't.
Okay.
I won't barrage you with all of them.
Okay.
They all seem to center around this idea of, like, how do you have faith in times of uncertainty, or in times of like duress, or like you have all this anxiety and you're overwhelmed and you just need to have faith. I think that's what it seemed like a lot of the questions were.
Yeah. I like to think of the gospel passage. I think it's the centurion, where he says, or it's one of the people being healed, but I just remember the line where it says, I do believe, help my unbelief.
Oh, I like that.
And I think that's one of the best prayers in all the gospel. I do believe, I do have some faith, but help my unbelief. And I think
that's really good.
I think when we feel our faith is weakest, that's actually when it's strongest, because then it's not our thing. Then we really do have to depend on God. And something I always tell people, when they come to, because sometimes people confess, lack of faith, or I question God, or I question God's existence, or I question whether or not He's there for me. And when you look at the scriptures, and when you look at the walk of faith and people who have faith in the scriptures, they're always questioning, they're always searching, and so I think it's best if our faith kind of contains questions. It's when we get into the questioning and the searching, that's actually, to me, a sign that that our faith is deepening.
Right.
We're coming from more.
It's like we're going deeper, right? Like
yeah. So people come to me all tied up in knots, saying, I think I'm losing my faith. I don't believe in God like I used to. And I just tell them, I say, you are in a fantastic place.
Right.
There's a lot of grace here. And you can see the weights just lift off of them, because, faith is not just something that, it doesn't mean we're just isolated from the big questions of life. Faith is what helps us, is what integrates all the questions into our search for God, right? So I think that is when we're questioning, when we're probing, when we're searching, when we feel like our faith is weak, I think that's actually when God's doing a lot in our lives. So
that's great.
So I guess that's kind of one of the main things, and for me, that's what I always remember too. Is God doesn't want a robot who's just like, when you look at when you look at the way He deals with Abraham and Moses and Mary and Peter in the scriptures, it's always this give and take, this back and forth of questioning. That's what He's concerned about, is the relationship.
Yeah.
So He wants to know. He wants to know your doubts. He wants to know your questions.
Yes, I love that. Like, he wants to be in relationship with you, like, all the time. And so you're right. Those probing and those questions, that is like building the relationship. So I think what a lot of us struggle with as well, especially in those moments of uncertainty, is that we need to have patience, right? Yeah. We actually need to wait. We don't want to wait.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is what faith is faith keeps us in the game when we don't want to wait, right? So you just want an answer now. You want a resolution now. You want to know what's going to happen. You want to know how it's going to turn out. And faith just is keeping us there when we don't know how it's going to pan out. And that's why faith is what just lets us sit with the questions and to find also peace in the questions and in being patient. But that is so hard, especially when when you're going through, just times that are excruciating and very difficult, it can be so hard just to, and I think that's, when it's really difficult, I think we find our comfort in Jesus on the cross. He's he's there, and he's completely powerless. The only thing he can do is just hang there. Right. But it's in that complete powerlessness that he's actually saving the world. And for us too, like I said, when our faith is weakest, when we feel like we're at our weakest, that's actually probably when grace is most operative in our life, because it's no longer our project, it's God's project.
Right.
So
it's also such an opposite view of leadership, right? Like when you look at Jesus in his life, everything he did is opposite of any other leader that we typically think of. How you said, he gave his life, and as you said, he had just hang there and wait to save the world. And
and that's one of the things that one of the things about Jesus and his leadership is the downward mobility. Okay, that humility was key to his leadership. And when if you read the hymn to Philippians, which is Philippians 2:5-11, and you read, it's Paul, it's an ancient Christian hymn, and Paul uses it to kind of show the journey of Jesus, the Messiah. And, for one, he's God and he becomes a human being, which is scandalous, okay? But not only does he become a human being, he becomes a slave to us all, as Paul says. He becomes in the likeness of a human, but not only that, he becomes a slave, which is even more humiliating and shameful. Yes. And then Paul says it goes even further, because he says not only a slave, but then he dies the most shameful death on the cross, which is even more humiliating. So the journey of Jesus is this downward mobility.
That's amazing. I mean, thank you for sharing that. I have never once thought of it like that. And
the downward mobility is to meet us like that. That's where he finds us. And I think when we're in a place of darkness in our lives, I think that's what's most important to remember, is that is the privileged meeting place of God. That's where he wants to be with us. That's where he comes to meet us. And faith is what, just standing in that place, being faithful in that place, is what's going to open up a whole new realm of grace for us, right? And then the rest of the hymn is going the reverse direction. Once Jesus meets us there, then we're not going to stay there. I think that's the other important thing to remember when you're in a dark place or when you're in desolation is the devil wants you to think that this is it. This is what it is. And this is going to be like this forever. And I think that's what's also important to remember is this is temporary, right? I'm having a bad day, a bad week, a bad year. But even if my external circumstances don't get better, I can grow into this, and grace is going to bring me a place of peace and happiness, right? That if we're with God, we're never stuck. And that's the beauty. Yeah. So,
and it can be hard to obviously see it in the moment, but I just love how you said, just sit there with him, and then there is where you find your peace. And it's the way you also describe the downward mobility is amazing.
Yeah. And I think that's a movement we kind of have to learn in our lives too, is learning how to be humble. And the reality is we're happier that way. And but it is in the moment, the devil just wants us to think, oh, this is all that's ever going to be is pain and suffering, and you're just going to be alone forever. And that is not the voice of Jesus. And Jesus, he meets us there and he says, look, okay, this is the place I wanted to meet you. Now let's go. Let's get on with salvation.
That's right. So were you always reading scripture as a little boy, or your mom's amazing. I don't know if you guys he's done videos with his mom. She's the coolest ever.
She's probably watching this. She's probably or she'll probably watch it at some
Can you
point.
come on sometime? Can you tell us how to raise a Father Nathan, please?
So,
Us moms need help.
you know, I
Credit too.
yeah, definitely. More credit than I deserve, I think. But I think so. I did when I was in 7th grade. I started going to Catholic school.
Okay.
And but my freshman and sophomore year of high school, I was at the same school, and I just had scripture classes, and my scripture teachers were very good at showing like how amazing the text was, how a lot of the things in the New Testament you can see foreshadowed in the Old Testament already, and yeah, it just became a real. It was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And,
can I ask you your favorite? Like, what's your favorite passage, and then also your favorite, like, is it Paul? Is it, any one of his, or is it?
Well, that's an unfair question to ask for my favorite scripture, but I will do my best.
Because you like all of them, yeah.
But so for instance, the one that really got me into scripture of the Old Testament resonances with the New Testament is reading the story of the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham, and how you have Isaac, who is an only son of his father, and they go up a mountain, and I think it takes 2 or 3 days to get up the mountain, right? And as they're going up the mountain, they need wood for the sacrifice to burn the Holocaust, and Isaac carries the wood of the sacrifice on his back up the mountain. And the way up the mountain, as they're preparing the sacrifice, Isaac asks Abraham, his father, where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham just says to Isaac, and Abraham thinks he's going to have to sacrifice Isaac. He just says, God will provide himself as the sacrifice, or God will provide himself. Right? But you can see the resonances with Jesus. They're carrying the wood of the cross up the hill of Golgotha, right? And just the foreshadowing of being the only son of the Father as the one who was sacrificed, and how that story really prepared the way for Jesus, so we could recognize what Jesus was doing. But okay, so now I got to tell you my favorite. Yes. Probably my favorite scripture passage in the whole Bible is, I would say, is the prologue of John. It's the beginning of the chapter of John.
Yeah.
So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And there's just so many beautiful things about that passage, and then the Word becoming flesh, and the darkness and the light could not overcome it. It's one of the most powerful, and of course what John's doing is he's rewriting Genesis. Genesis begins with in the beginning, right? But Genesis is in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth by speaking. And here John's saying, but even before God spoke creating the heavens and the earth, in the beginning was just the Word. Yeah. And I'm just telling you about who God is, and that this God became flesh for us. But now that I say that's my favorite passage, I think of like 3 others that I think should have made the cut. So I don't know how much time I have, but
I love how you said "help my unbelief." I think that's really good and really helpful.
Yeah. Can I say one more favorite passage? I don't want to take up time.
Yes.
Okay. So, and I think this also has to do with the first question about the way faith operates in our life. I really love the passage where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest." Because he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Right? And he says, "I am meek and humble of heart." But the thing I love about that passage is when he says, "My yoke is easy," if you know how ancient people used yokes and used oxen with their yokes, because I think we tend to think us carrying the yoke, and Jesus may be behind us, right? But the way it worked is a yoke usually had 2 oxen. And so what you would do is if you had a young oxen, the young oxen would kick against the yoke and would try to go his own direction. And so what you did is you always paired an older, experienced ox with a younger, less experienced ox. And the experienced ox would help the younger one stay the course and would help him like pull the plow. And so when Jesus says, "My yoke is easy," he's referring to the yoke he's wearing with us, right? My yoke is easy. The one I wear, the yoke of the Father, is easy.
Right.
And so he's with us. He's carrying the yoke with us. And that's why the yoke is easy. He's the older, experienced ox. We're the younger ox who's trying to get out of the yoke and trying to go their own direction. But no, he's there, right there with us. And we're yeah. But he plows with us together. He's together with us. And and he has that meek, humble heart, that he's not some overlord that is whipping us and, making us plow. He's carrying the yoke with us. And that, to me, when I'm having a rough day, I just remember that of Jesus is right there with me.
Great image, yeah.
Hello, how are you?
Hi. He's playing with something, I don't know. Okay, so, well, I think you already provided this, but how to handle toxic relationships, specifically those you're extremely close to, like parents or family members.
Yeah, I actually deal with that a lot. Helping people navigate toxic relationships.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things is, and the difficult thing, especially with parents, is that, the reason why it can be so toxic with parents is because we do have this genetic, natural attachment and this built-in trust that's baked into the relationship. And we feel like we need to honor them and to respect them. But depending on the degree of toxicity, one thing I say is that it is so important, especially if there's been any kind of abuse in the past, emotional, verbal, or physical. If that's the nature of the toxicity, it's very important to know and to affirm that you do not have to subject yourself to abuse. Right? That people, they need to have a right to be in your life. They have to earn that right. And part of that is respect. If people don't respect you at the very least, maybe they don't love you as much as they should, but if they don't respect you, if they abuse you, then you have a right. You don't have to let them into your life. You don't have to continually allow that to go on. And that's something where people don't, especially a lot of devout Catholics I don't think understand, because there's almost a sense that I have to, this is just my lot. I have to be abused by these people. Right. This toxicity has to be in my life. And I would really strongly say no, not at all. If somebody's not good for you, if somebody is toxic, if somebody's poisoning your soul and poisoning your spirit, I think God gives us the right to be able to say, no, this is not, I don't need this, right? And to be free of that, I think is really important. But that also goes for the various kinds of relationships we can get into that are unhealthy, right, or toxic. I think we do need to protect ourselves, okay? Yeah. I think people get into if we let people continually abuse us, that's called, I think in psychology, codependency, right? Where we kind of let their problems control our lives. We let their issues control our lives.
Like, what if they're not really abusive, but they're like a tornado?
Yeah.
You're really peaceful, and then they come around and you're like, what just happened?
Yeah, and I think that's a case where, let's say it's not abuse, but let's just say they're just difficult people to be around.
Yeah, they're difficult people. Yeah.
Which is not uncommon. And I think that's, that's a case where it's a similar